Well, we're still in St. George.
I love this place.
It's every November they have the Color Country Model Railroad Club's open house.
Right.
And we're looking at one last railroad here. This is an HO railroad by Joe Adaire. And it's under construction, and the neat thing there is it means that you can see exactly how it's being built, because he's using a type of construction known as L-girder framework.
Oh, wow.
Or L-girder benchwork.
Wow, that's cool.
So let's take a close look at this. First of all, the track plan itself is a type of track plan called a dog bone, because it's got kind of circles at both ends with a narrow section in the middle like a dog bone.
Well, that's neat.
It's my favorite type of track plan because you can fit it into some really unusual spaces and much smaller spaces. And then here again, like I was saying, it's HO and it's Southern Pacific.
Oh, look at that.
And I've always liked Southern Pacific because they have beautiful paint jobs, and they put more lights and whistles and bells on their locomotives than any other railroad that was ever created. So right here you can see how this railroad is constructed. And this is really old school, the L-girder type of benchwork. And the whole thing starts off with legs, of course. You want to buy some 2x2 wood and construct legs out of the 2x2. And that will also determine the height of the railroad. Now, I used to be an advocate for low basic benchwork because it's real easy to add track above the benchwork, not so much below the benchwork.
Right.
And so I thought, well, the lower you can make it, the better. But now I think no, because after having a layout with 30-inch benchwork, crawling around underneath 30-inch no. So I would recommend 42 inches. That's about what this is, and that's what our railroad is.
Well, right.
Now you can see that a fair amount of the benchwork exists below the height of the legs, and that's the L-girder support structure, but the cross members, the joists, should line up approximately with the tops of the legs, and so that really is basically the height of the railroad. Everything below that is structural. And then you want to add diagonal bracing to the legs. Now this railroad's all bolted to the wall, screwed to the walls, so you wouldn't think it would wobble side to side. But a layout can easily wobble side to side, and especially if it's freestanding, oh boy, do you need diagonal bracing. And then this right here is the aforementioned L-girder. And these, there's several of these in the railroad, and they are the basic support structure for all of the rest of the benchwork. Everything sits on top of the L-girders. So let's take a closer look at how you construct the L-girder. It starts off as a simple 1x4 like this, and then on the top of the 1x4 you add a 1x2.
Oh.
And then the 1x2 is screwed to the 1x4, and you want that joint to be really strong. You might even want to add glue. So anyway, you can screw the 1x2 to the top of the 1x4, and you can see that forms an L-girder, and from below you can now run screws up into your joists, your cross supports, because you have this little lip here to run screws up through. It's actually quite clever. So here we can see the cross supports, the joists, if you will, and they're sitting on top of the L-girder, and the joists aren't set to any particular spacing. You put those where you need them. But one of the advantages of this type of construction is you can add more joists as needed, because you'll be placing those in fairly random places depending on what the track plan is. So you can see here how the joists sit on top of the L-girder, and then you can run a screw right up through here. Now I would suggest pre-drilling it so you don't split the whole thing out, but wherever there's a joist resting on top of the L-girder, you can just run a screw right up through there. Clever. So this forms the basic benchwork. It looks like that. And again, notice that the spacing on the cross joist is not even, it's just random, and it's entirely based on the track plan from above. Wherever you need one of these, you just add one of these in, and then you've got your cross bracing there to keep the whole thing from wobbling side to side. And now to the joists, or the cross braces, you add risers. And the roadbed is going to sit on these actual risers, and the risers are all different heights depending on the grade of the track and that sort of thing. An advantage here is you can raise and lower those as needed, and then here you put a little cross piece across here to better support the roadbed. So you might find yourself placing these in a lot of different places. It's just wherever you need to support the roadbed. But one of the neat things here is, as you're trying to figure out the grade of the railroad, inevitably it's going to end up with a tilt, wobble, low place, high place, something like that. So you can just unscrew these risers and then reattach them and reset the grade easily just by moving the risers up and down. Isn't that clever? And now he's attached his roadbed to the top of the risers, and he's using something called Splined roadbed. And so my first railroad, I cut this all out of plywood with a saber saw, and oh my goodness, is that a lot of work and difficult to figure out. And a splined roadbed is much simpler to build, and you can simply bend it to the shape of the curve, and it also will help make the curves nice and gentle. It creates what's called an easement, where the track goes from being a straight track to a curved track. Instead of just suddenly kinking over into a curve, it gradually becomes a curve, and the splined roadbed just naturally forms that. And so you can see he's taken 6 pieces of this 1/8" masonite that's been cut down to 1-inch strips, and then standing those vertically, all 6 of them form the roadbed, and that's what makes it flexible. And one of the advantages of using masonite is it's incredibly flexible by its very nature. A lot of splined roadbed is made out of a pine, and then that's a lot harder to bend. Masonite bends so easily. The downside of masonite is you really can't drive a nail into it or a screw or anything. It's as hard as concrete. And so it requires gluing the roadbed together. So you can see what he's done here is he's taken the 6 strips of masonite and bent that to the shape of the track, held in place with a lot of different spring clamps. Take a quick trip down to Harbor Freight and grab yourself 30 spring clamps. But then placing glue between the 6 different strips and then clamping it in place like this for the glue to dry, and you end up with a very, very rigid roadbed that follows exactly your track plan.
So as you're bending this masonite, it all comes out different lengths just by the nature of what you're doing. So does that make the joints stronger too if you add on to it?
It sure does, because you can imagine it just fall apart if all of the joints were in the same place. But by bending it, you can see the end right there. It's all coming out at different lengths, and that puts all of your seams in different places, and that makes it very, very strong. In fact, if your seams were all lining up in one place, you'd want to cut those to different lengths just so your joints wouldn't all be in one place.
Right.
When you get this done, you've got one solid single structure for roadbed that's just one big piece.
So what is he using there for the road base?
It's a cork product that you can
Really?
just buy at the hobby shops. We're using Homosote on our railroad, but that's a lot of work. This stuff, you just buy strips of it, and it's totally flexible, and you can just bend it to follow the roadbed. So the advantage there is it's really simple. The disadvantage is it comes in HO.
Right. It also looks like gravel, which would be like ballast.
Yeah, so it automatically looks like a ballasted roadbed.
So do you glue that on?
Well, yeah, since you can't really put screws or nails or anything into the masonite, you just simply glue the cork in place, and there again you'd want to clamp it while the glue dries.
Right.
And now we simply set the flex track on top of the cork roadbed. And one of the purposes for the cork roadbed is now you've got something that you can put a track nail down into.
Right.
If you were trying to put that track nail down into the masonite, well, you'd never be able to do that. And so that's one of the purposes for having the cork roadbed, and then it looks nice. And then another advantage is it improves the sound of the trains. Okay, now we can also see his wiring because everything's all exposed, and he's run a heavy power bus here, probably something like a 12 gauge or a 10 gauge wire, red and black. Those are the same colors we're using on our main track bus. And then you drop a lead from the track down to the track bus every so often. And what we've done on our railroad and on all the railroads we've ever built is put one of these drops for every single rail. And people have said, well, that's overkill. Well, yeah, but we've never had anything ever open up because we're not running power through any of the rail joints. Everything is tied to this bus. And then by using a red and a black wire, you know, red is always the outside rail, black is always the inside rail. Your chances of accidentally wiring into a dead short are greatly reduced.
Don't we need to insulate those joints, wrap something around them?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a low voltage, and so the temptation is to say it's okay, but if those two things touch...
Yeah, you get a mouse in there with a trapeze act going, yeah.
And it's just going to short out the railroad, which isn't going to hurt the power supply or anything, but it's going to be 2 days of crawling around under here going, oh, okay, oh, gee. So it's better to just insulate all of your joints, even though they're low voltage.
Right. Now, because I can turn worry into an Olympic event, what keeps the train on the track and it doesn't fall to its death to the floor?
Yeah, it's sort of like an elevated or even a monorail, and it's at one little derailment and a very expensive bit of train equipment falls to the floor. But once the scenery is in and there's ground right up to the edge of the track, then that will protect the trains. Inside tunnels and that sort of thing, you want to put some sort of like a cardboard railing all the way around so that a derailment doesn't turn into a disaster.
Right. In the meantime, don't sneeze.
Don't sneeze, because while the railroad's in this state, you could accidentally send something crashing to the floor. Mm-hmm. Little precarious, but look how beautiful. And you can test the operation now. And again, if you find that there's a little tiny dip in the track work or something, you can just take those risers, raise them up 1/8 of an inch, lower them 1/16 of an inch. That would be, 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters for those of us who speak millimeter. But I could hardly work on the rails, so I put my temperature gauge on the rails. The rails were 145. And his wife is building these pine trees.
I was just blown away by how she does that.
Yeah, so she gave us the full description of how this process works, and I haven't seen it done this way.
No, and I want to try it.
Absolutely. So she's starting with 2 heavy pieces of wire and then twine. She said the type of twine, but you can see the 2 strips of this rope up to the top there, and then you just have to pull it, all the strands apart, cut it into lengths, and then pull it all apart, and then glue the separated strands to the 2 wires.
Right.
And now all you have to do is twist those wires up, right?
Right, that's the job.
It's such heavy wire, it's like, how do you twist that into this tight little bundle like this to form these pine trees? And so here's how she's twisting that wire.
Oh my goodness, look at that device.
Yeah, and you got one for Christmas.
I did, but I've not used it yet, and we'll have to see.
There's going to be a learning curve, but after she showed us how this thing works, it's like, well, we got to get a hold of one of those, but you can clamp the 2 wires into the jaws of the pliers here, and then that locks in place, and then you work the tool up and down like one of those screwdrivers that spins around when you pull them in and out, and it twists the wire up and twists it into a tight bundle, even if it's this really heavy, stiff wire.
Isn't that something?
Wow.
Yes.
And there's the end product right there.
I think they look so neat. They're sort of like those bottle brush trees, but I like the way these look so much better.
Well, and you have total control over the process, and I really like that. So once they're twisted up, you take some scissors and trim that out and shape the whole thing, and then shoot it with some color from a spray can, because you don't want to just leave it the bare color, and then add some Woodland Scenics flocking material.
Right.
To give it a little more of a texture. But you have your dead branches and your pine needles and the whole thing all right there.
Right.
Well, anyway, this is already a pretty spectacular model railroad.
Oh, I love it.
And I'm really looking forward to coming down here next year for the open house. I'm willing to bet this looks a lot different by then.
I'll bet it does.
And this is just really neat to see a railroad coming together. And like I say, it's fun when it's apart like this because you can really get a sense of the process and see the bones of the thing, if you will, to see how it all goes together.
Right. Well,
that just about sums up the Color Country Model Railroad Club's open house.
That's been a fun trip.
Oh, it's so fun coming down. We come down every single year. And this was a really good experience. We saw some really neat stuff, talked to some friends from previous trips, and it was just an enormous amount of fun. Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And the easy way to do that is with the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there.
There it is.
Well, we're not sure how you found this hopefully informative and entertaining video on the internet and not boring. And we will see you here on Tuesday with some Tuesday stuff. Bye-bye.
Bye.